Hey guys, it's Kaylor. Welcome to the YouTube channel. This is Design Build Launch episode 5. In the last video, we created our style guide page and imported all of our assets from Adobe XD here inside of Webflow. In today's video, we're going to start building our website. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I like to do with my website is add a container. So I'm actually going to add this as a div block because I'm going to set a custom width. So I'm going to call this a class of content container. So we have our div here, and what we need to do is set the left and the right to auto by selecting this icon here for spacing. And down here for the max width, we're going to set our max width to 1100 pixels. So no matter how large this browser gets with the user dragging it around and sizing it, it will never get larger than 1100, which is what we want. If we quickly check back here, our design in Adobe XD, you'll notice that we have our design offset. So if I turn on the grid layout, we have 3 whole columns over here on the left of space with our navigation inside of that. And the rest of our content is kind of shifted over here to the right. It's not perfectly centered. And that's what I wanted for this design, so that these navigation links can scroll down through this empty space to meet up here in the footer. So what we're going to do here in Webflow is I'm going to add a padding of 300 pixels on the left-hand side. And by doing that, you can't see it right now, but it's going to add a padding right here for that sidebar to be stored in, so it pushes all of our content over here on the right. I'm going to throw another div block inside of that, and now you'll see that this space has shifted over. If I select my container, you can now see that we have that 300 pixel gap there. So with this div block selected, let's just go ahead and call this hero. This is going to be our hero section that's going to fill up this first part of our browser. So let's go ahead and set the height to 100 VH for viewport height. So that will fill the entire browser from top to bottom, no matter what size it is scaled to. And we want to also set a minimum height to 700 pixels. That way, if our browser gets shrunk really small, we're not having all of our elements inside of here crush on top of each other. And I'm also going to be selecting this as relative for its position. That way, when we have an absolute element inside of here, it's relative to this. For the remainder of this video, instead of going over here to the add panel, I'm simply going to hit Command K and type in what I would like, such as a div block, and it's going to go ahead and create one there for me, just to speed things up a little bit. We're going to call this div hero header. Inside of that, I'm going to add a heading. This is going to be an H3. We'll give that a class of heading H3, as well as our combo class of logo. We're pulling that directly from our style sheet. You can see that our logo has both of those classes. So that's why we went ahead and set those up ahead of time. So now we have this perfectly styled the way we'd like it. Also, with that hero header selected, I'm going to add a text link. I'm going to give this a class of link main, which turns it to purple. And I'm going to change the text to let's start a project. Selecting the hero header div, I'm going to set the display to flex, horizontal, make sure they're aligned to the center, and I'm going to set the justify to space in between so that we have one on the left and one here on the right. Now I'm going to add another heading, and we need to make sure this heading is not inside our hero header. This heading is going to be an H1, so we're going to give it our heading H1 class. And since this is the only H1 we're going to be using throughout the website, I'm actually going to adjust the margin instead of adding a combo class to add spacing. So let's go with something like 110 to give us some space from the top there. And then we'll add our text. So we have full stack digital designer and developer, but again, feel free to add your own. And then let's also add our logo text. I'm just going to put this as my name with a period. And in our design, we have a purple period here just for a bit of detail. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to click this paintbrush icon to wrap that with a span. So that's going to give us control over this one element. So I'm going to select that text span, and I'm going to give it a class of logo span. And we're going to set the color to the purple color that we're using. So now that we have that bit of detail, I'm going to select the entire hero section, and I'm going to add some padding to the top of about 58 to 60 pixels, just to push that down a bit from the top. The next thing we have in here is an image. So I'm going to hit Command K and type out image. For the image settings, we'll select our circle 1, which is these 2 circles. We'll close that for now. And since we have the hero section set to relative, we can select absolute for our positioning. For the top, let's just try 18%. And then I'll set the right side to 0%. We also need to set this behind everything else. So I'm going to go to the Z index and set that to -1. And lastly, let's go ahead and adjust the max width to something like 500 pixels or so. So by selecting the toggle preview with the eye icon up here in the top, we can see what this looks like on the desktop version. If we click and drag here from the side, we can scale the browser in, and you'll see that the numbers are adjusting in the top center there, letting us know how many pixels wide we are at. So you can see that it's not responsive, but we'll worry about setting all the responsive details later. For now, we just want it to look good on desktop. And so it breaks from desktop to right there. So as long as it looks good from here, outward, we are fine, which it does, thanks to that 1100 pixel container. It doesn't go any larger than that, and it looks nice here in the center. So I flew through this pretty quickly, so I want to explain a little bit more about what we just did. So this hero header we have here is a div around both of these elements. And since we have that around both of these, it applies this display to the children inside of it. So this is set to Flexbox, which in code language translates to wizardry. So based on the direction we set, horizontal or vertical, and the align and justify, it's going to tell these elements here inside of this hero header, the children, what to do. This is great when you don't know the exact size and width of the elements inside here, as we're going to be making this design responsive. We want these elements to best fill the space available. So we've set them to the center so that they're centered inside of this box. And we've set them to the space between, which is going to distribute one at the start of the box and one at the end of the box. So one will always be on the left and one will always be on the right. Also here with the image in the background, we have that set to absolute. In doing so, it's going to position it relative to its nearest ancestor, which in this would be its parent, the hero section. So that's why we have the hero set to relative and the image is set to absolute. One thing to note here, if we didn't set the hero section to relative, it would have no direct ancestor, so it would be relative to the body element instead. Since this image is in the topmost section of our page, it's still going to be 18% from the top, but for best practice, I always like to set my section to relative and have that the ancestor to everything that's going to be absolute in that section. So with all that said, we're going to move on now. We'll worry with the navigation at the end. We're going to first get all of our sections in first. So we have our hero section done. So I'm going to hit Command K. And then I'm going to grab a div block and we're going to give this a class of skills or disciplines, whatever you want to name it. And the only thing we're going to do on here is adjust the top margin, which we'll do in a bit, and the padding on the bottom. So we have 300 pixel spacing in between each of our sections in our design. So I'm going to split that between each of the sections at 150. So it adds up to 300 space in between. So we'll add 150 padding to the bottom. I'm going to hit Command K and we're going to grab a div block. I'm going to call this skills header. That way we're keeping things nice and consistent since we have a header up here. And then inside of that, Command K, going to add a heading. This heading is going to be an H2. So we'll set the class to a H2 heading. Going to grab the text from our design. And while we're in here, we can take a look at how this section is laid out. So first off, the heading at the top is actually inside of the hero section. So we're going to offset this entire section with that negative margin I was talking about. And then we're going to probably use a grid to set this up so that we can have all the headings on the left and the body on the right. Back in Webflow, we'll just paste in that heading text. Then I'm going to hit Command K and I'm just going to type in grid. You can also get the grid from the layout elements. And with grid, we have these rows and columns. In this case, we're going to add 2 more since we have 4 disciplines or skills. And from here, I'm actually going to open the add menu and I'll just drag out what we need. So I'll drag in a heading into the first slot. This is going to be an H3. And then we'll add our heading, H3 class. And then we'll drag out a paragraph. Back in our design, I'm going to grab each of these and start to paste them in. And we need to set those to the paragraph normal class we created, which is that 18 pixel with 27 pixel height. And once we have that, I'm going to select the first heading here, hold Alt and click and drag until we have it here in this third box. And I'm going to do the same with the paragraph, and I'm going to repeat that all the way down to the bottom. So now I've updated all of these texts. So I'm actually going to go ahead and select edit on that, and I'm going to drag this over to a 0.75 fraction. That way this section is a little bit smaller, and so we have a little bit larger of a body section over here on the right. And then we can also drag out some space in between each of these. I think we have 80 in our design, but that's looking a little too large possibly. We might go to 70. But for now, I guess we'll leave that. And then you can either remove this space here or just leave it. I'm actually just going to leave it for now, and then I'm going to hit done. So now we have this set up, but we're missing the gap in between our H2 and this grid. So I'm going to select the skills header, and at the bottom, I'm going to add 80 pixel margin. And so that didn't do anything because we actually have the grid inside of this. So I'm going to drag that out side of that grouping. So the only thing we have inside the skills header is the H2. Then the grid is below it. And so we have 80 spacing throughout this section now. Throughout this section, each of these headings is either purple or green. So we're going to do that with a combo class. So I'm just going to call this purple text. And then I'm going to change the color from gray to purple to overwrite that. And then we'll just add that to each one of our H3s. And then for the final one, we're going to call it green text. And we'll change that from gray to green. The last thing we need to do for this section is to add a negative margin. So I'm going to select skills so that grabs the entire container. And I'm going to scroll up so that all we can see is the hero. And then I'm going to drag this to a negative. And then I'm going to set our text somewhere around there. So that's negative 42 pixels for me. And when we go to live preview, we'll take a look at that. Maybe a little bit larger. Negative 45. Looks pretty good. So the great thing about using a grid for this section is that we can easily just remove one of these columns and then they'll stack on top of each other really nicely when we get to a mobile view. So that's a great way of just preparing ahead of time for that responsive nature that this design is going to need. So looking back at our design, we now have our hero section in Webflow. We're leaving out the nav for now. We have our discipline section in now, and the next up is going to be our projects. We're also going to have the shape in the background. So we're going to set this section to relative. So let's go ahead and start with this new section. So I'm going to hit Command K and I'm going to type out div block. And that has added it down here in the bottom. So I'm just going to drag that above skills and then drag it below so that it's outside of the skills section there. And we're going to call this projects. We have 150 spacing here at the bottom of the skill section. So we're going to add that onto the top of this section. 150 pixels to give us 300 space in between. And then I'm going to set 150 on the bottom as well. That way the next section will have that spacing applied. Inside of here, we're going to continue with that header. So Command K, div block, we'll call this projects header, and then Command K, add a heading in there. This is going to be an H2. So we'll apply our heading to class. Change our heading text. And then I'm going to add another grid. So I'm going to add a bottom row here. We're going to adjust the spacing first off to 60 pixels in between the cards. So 60 all around. So we have 60 for the column and 60 for the row gap. I'm going to select done. And the one thing we need to adjust on the alignment is we need to select this right here, which is the align start. And everything else can be left alone. We actually have our cards made in our styles. So I'm going to go over to the styles. I'm going to grab the card large, hit Command C to copy that. And then back over here in the home. Inside of the grid, I'm going to hit Command V to paste that in. And you'll see our card that we already have set up fills this space. So I'm going to paste that until we have a total of 5. I'm going to select the image, hit the cog, and replace the image. Let's go with the orange background. You can double click as well to replace the image. For this one, we will go with green, blue, and then finally for the last one, we'll set that to our pink background. Then we'll change our headings. So I've changed all of my card text here, and we do have this one on 2 lines, so we need to change this to center alignment. For the 6th and final block here, I'm just going to drag in a normal div block so that it is not an actual link block. So to make sure we have that in the correct spot, so I'll just drag it over. And we'll give this a class of card large, like the rest of these. And then inside of this, we'll have a paragraph. And we'll have a text link. Since this card is unique, we're going to give it a combo class of text card. And from here, we still have this displayed as flex since it has the card large setting that. But now we're going to change it to vertical, and we're going to align them to the left. And we'll leave the justify at center. Lastly, we need to set the align self, which is this right here. This is going to allow us to specify the alignment of this child only, so it doesn't apply to anything else. We're going to center that so that it is centered inside of this card. I'm going to quickly paste in the paragraph text, and we will add a class of paragraph normal to this. And then for our link, we'll set that to link secondary. So it is our green link. And we'll change the text on that. One thing you'll notice is that when we hover over this, it's even more noticeable here. When we hover over that, it's dropping the opacity down to 80% because that is what the card large has set. To change that, we'll select the card. And since we have the combo class of text card added, we're just going to hit the drop down, go to hover, and we need to remove that by setting it back to 100% so that when it's hovered on, it will do nothing. As you can see, like that. So that when they hover over this link, it still goes to white. Lastly, for this section, I'm going to select the project header, and I'm going to add 40 pixels of margin to the bottom. And once again, the grid is inside of this project header, so we'll just drag that out. So up top, we have our header, and then below that, we have our grid. So if we take a look back at our design, we have all this content here set up, but you'll notice that we don't have this offset. So we're taking advantage of the CSS grid for this section to make this a lot easier when we go to make this design responsive and make those responsive adjustments. But because of that, CSS grid does not allow us to easily add an offset to one side of the column like this. So we're gonna have to do that manually, playing around with padding and margin. So back here in Webflow, I have card large selected, which is going to apply to every single one of these cards. I already know I want the right side to go down 60 pixels to match the spacing in between each of these cards. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of predict that. And with card large selected, I'm going to set the margin on the bottom to -60 pixels. So that shifts everything up -60 pixels. So now I'm going to select the orange card here on the right side and give this a combo class of right card. I'm going to do the same thing for this teal card. And for now, we'll leave the text card alone. So now with either the orange card or the blue card selected, allowing us to edit that right card combo class, we're going to go to the margin on the top and add 60 pixels of margin. And like that, we now have our offset. So all we've done is applied a -60 margin on the bottom of all the cards, and then only the ones on the right, we've applied a margin at the top of 60, giving us that offset. So you can see here, we have all of our cards the way we want them. So with our card section now adjusted, let's go ahead and add in our final thing for this project section, which is our image. So I'm going to select our circle 2. Let's lower the size of this. So I'm going to change this from a percentage to a pixel value on the max width. It's set to 337 currently, so we'll drop that down to something like 240 pixels. That looks like a good size. It's currently inside of our project header. So I'm going to drag that down to the bottom. So that is just inside of our project section, but it is not inside our grid or our project header. With projects selected, I'm going to make sure that we have this set to relative so that we can select our image and choose an absolute positioning. And you'll see right here, it's relative to the project section. For the left-hand side, we can try something like -10%. And then I'll set the top value to 0% to start. So it should be at the top of the section, which it is. And then we will just drag this down around 34%, looks good. And 10 gives it a good overhang, so we'll leave that alone as well. And now we need to send it to the back with a -1Z index, putting it behind our cards there. So you'll notice when we hover over the cards, we can just kind of see that through there. That looks pretty cool. But overall, it is behind our cards. So below our project section is our about section. And then finally, to follow that up with is the footer. So let's go ahead and put the about section in. So I'm just going to hit Command K and grab a div block. And we'll make sure that is inside of our content container at the bottom. And we'll give this a class of about. So we need to add that padding to the top and bottom. So I'm going to hold Alt and drag until we get to about 150. That way we're keeping that consistent. And we do have an overhang of this section of 60, as you can see there. So up here for the top, I'm actually going to add 60 to that, giving us 210 to make that an actual 300 gap there. Command K, and we'll just throw in a grid. Right click on the bottommost row and delete it. Again, I'm going to drag that to a 0.75 for the left and 1 for the fraction on the right. And I'm going to hit done. Command K, we need a heading. This will be a H2. And then we need a paragraph, so we'll add that one as well. We'll select our heading and then add our heading H2 class to it. And then for this section, I want the heading to be white, so I'm going to add a combo class. We'll just call that about heading, and we'll simply change the text color to white to override the default gray. Change the paragraph text to the text we're using in our design. And then I'm going to make sure that is 2 paragraphs. And we'll add paragraph normal to that paragraph. Add about me to the heading. And that's it for this section. So let's go ahead and add our last section, which is our footer. So I'll hit Command K and we'll grab a div block and make sure that is at the bottom of the content container. We'll give this a class of footer. And for this section, we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of letting the elements inside of this dictate how large it's going to be, we're actually going to set that by hand. So I'm going to set the height to 900 pixels. For now, we are going to give this section a background color. So I'm just going to set that to our medium black. Switching back over to Adobe XD, I want to explain why I'm setting this to a static 900 pixel height. So what we have currently in our design is something that looks like this in Webflow, because we have a container around our entire content at 1100 max width. So that makes the background of this section only able to be 1100 pixels wide. So what we've done is set this to 900 pixel height, so I can create another rectangle that's the exact same height, and then I can set it to the full width by setting it outside of the container itself. So we're going to position this rectangle behind this section so that it simulates a full width block here. And the reason we're doing this workaround is because we could simply just take this entire footer outside of the content container and it will automatically be full width. But the reason we're doing this is because when our navigation that's going to be over here is sliding down, if this footer is not inside the same content container, it's going to have the navigation either get stuck here or slide behind this entire section and make a whole lot more complications than if we just did this quick workaround. So we're only doing this because of the way I want the navigation to function. So by knowing the static height of this section, I can easily create another section that's 900 pixels, full width, and position it behind it. I'm gonna hit Command K and add a heading. This heading is going to be an H2. I'll give it our class of heading H2. And then I'm gonna give it a combo class of heading footer, and we'll set the color on the text to white. Just going to paste in our text. I'm also going to set a max width of 53% for now. So that is not full width of this section. And we need to get that off of the top of the section. So we're going to push that down about 140 pixels or so, just to give that some breathing room. And since we're going to have a link below this, we need to add some spacing on the bottom. So we'll do about 30 pixels of margin. So we'll go ahead and add that text link in now. And you'll see that that 30 margin is there. We'll give this link a class of link main and just change that to let's talk about your product. And one thing I forgot to do is here in this paragraph section, we need to add some spacing between this link and the paragraph. So I'm going to select that paragraph normal. It's going to give it a combo class and drop that margin down to 30 pixels so that we have some separation between that link as well. All right, so back to the footer. I'm going to hit Command K and grab a div block. And this div block is going to be called small card group. And inside of that, we're going to grab our small cards. So I'm going to head over to the styles page, select card small, hit Command C to create a copy. And then back over here in our home page, I'm going to select the grouping and paste in 2 cards. With small card group selected, I'm going to change this to a flex. And then I'm going to select the card small. And on the right-hand side, we need 40 pixels of margin to space those cards out for now. And then we'll add 80 to the top to push that down. So we're adding that actually to both of these cards so that when we go to mobile and they're stacked on top of each other vertically, they'll have space in between each other. And the last thing we need inside of here is an image. So go ahead and add that. And then we'll select our final group of circles, which is circle 3. I'm going to change the max width on this to 400 pixels, just to size it down a little bit. I'm going to select the footer section, make sure the position is set to relative. And you probably guessed it, we're going to change this to absolute now. You can either set the auto on the top and the right to 0 to get it in the top right corner, or you can just select this icon right here and it will do that for you. And then from there, we will adjust this by hand. So I'm going to drag this into the negatives, around -7, and then we'll leave the right-hand side at 0. And the last thing we need to do is change the text and icons on our cards. So I'll just change that one to consulting. Try a design concept, and I'll select our image and hit replace and select its appropriate icon. And then finally, pasting in the body text, so that now both of our cards are finished. So now this is the footer section done. We just need to create that background that I was telling you about before. So we're going to collapse this. With the body selected, I'm going to hit Command K, and I'm going to add a div block. So it's going to add it all the way down here at the bottom. With that div block selected, I'm going to call this footer BG. I'm going to match the height of the footer section with 900 pixels high, and I'm going to give it a background color of that medium black. So now we have this giant rectangle down here at the bottom. And since we've set that height to 900 pixels, we can go up here to the margin on the top and set that to -900 pixels to offset that up 900 pixels. So if I were to change the background color to something different so you can see it, such as green, you'll see that it is perfectly aligned to match the height and position of our footer. So I'm just going to change that back. And now we can hit the preview and see that we have this full footer section with our cards and our link. So now that we have all of our content on the page, let's go ahead and create our navigation up top and then our footer nav at the bottom, and that will finish off the desktop version of this site. So I'm going to select the content container and hit Command K and type in navbar. We'll just put that above the hero section. I'm going to drag everything out of this container they give us and then delete that and the brand link. The nav bar, I'll give a class of nav. For the nav menu, I'll give that a class of nav menu. And then for each of the links, we already have the link nav set up, so we'll just apply those to each one of them. And I'm also going to create a duplicate so that we have 4 links now. And then the menu button is for mobile. And for mobile, we're actually not going to need that, so I'm just going to delete that. So now all we have is the nav menu, and then our 4 nav links. I'm going to select the nav menu, and then I'm going to set that to flex, vertical. We'll align them to the left, and then we'll leave justify at start. And then I'm going to select the nav and switch that to flex just to get those over to the left. And then we're going to set the width to 300 pixels. Because if you'll remember, that is the width of the padding we have here on the content container, which is where this is going to go. So we'll put that in place by setting a margin of -300 pixels. And then for the positioning, instead of relative, we will go with sticky. And then we'll set that 60 pixels for the top value. And so you'll see that messes up our content here, but that's fine for now. And as we scroll down, it stays on the left and then slides over into the footer, which is exactly what we want. The nav has a default color, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that by selecting transparent. And then I'm quickly going to go through and add in the text for each of these links. For each of these links, we're going to set a margin on the left of 20 pixels and a margin on the bottom of 30 pixels. And then I'm also going to reset all of the paddings by holding Shift and Alt and dragging them to 0. So that positions our navigation nicely. I'm going to select the hero section, and here in the margin on the top, I'm going to drag that to a negative until it aligns so that these are all 3 center aligned. So that's around -217. So if we hit the live preview, as we scroll down, it sticks 60 pixels from the top there as we scroll through our design. So for now, we'll collapse all of this, and then we'll go back into our footer. With the footer selected, I'm going to hit Command K and create a div block. We'll drag that to the top, and we'll call this footer nav. Command K to create another div block. I'm going to call this footer nav group, and then Command K. Grab a text link, and with that text link created, I'm going to give that a class of link nav, and then copy that and paste it with Command C, Command V, till we have 4 links. With the footer nav group selected, I'm going to set the display to flex, the direction to vertical, and align them to the left. Then I'm going to select the footer nav, now that we have all of those set, and we're going to change the position from static to absolute. And you can make sure that that is relative to the footer by looking here. I'm going to set the width to 300 pixels. And then again, we'll set the margin to -300. So that puts this here on the left side of the footer in that 300 padding gap we have. But when we scroll down, it's going to clash with our navigation. So we need to drive this down. So with it selected, I'm going to go to the bottom and set that to 190 pixels. So that sets 190 pixels from the very bottom of the browser. Then I'll just quickly change all of the links over. Also inside of this nav group, let's add a heading. So Command K, and then we'll add a heading. And this heading is going to be an H3. So we'll give that a class of heading H3. And then we need to add the padding and margin like we have on all of our other links in this grouping. So we'll make a combo class called footer H3, and we'll set those with that combo class. So we'll do 20 pixels on the left margin, and instead of 30 on the bottom, I'm going to do 20 pixels for now, and we'll set this to the top of that and see how that sits. That looks pretty good. So we'll change the text now to social, and so now we have all of our social links. One thing I might do here is select the footer, and for the height, bump this up to 1000, just so we have a little bit more room. And we'll also have to do that for the footer BG. And don't forget to adjust the margin to now a -1000 instead of 900. And then with our footer nav, I'm going to increase how high that sits up from the bottom of the browser now, since we have more pixels. So we'll go with 240 from the bottom of the browser. You could even go higher if you'd like. Maybe something like 290 would look good. So we'll just leave that for now. We'll toggle on the preview. And if we scroll to the top, this is what we have so far. And you'll notice that our navigation slides down into the footer. Now we have to set up each of these links to automatically scroll to the different sections of the page, because right now they're currently doing nothing. That's pretty easy to do. We have 4 links here. The first one is to the digital designer and developer, which is the discipline section. So we'll select skills, and then we're going to hit the settings cog over here on the right, and we'll give this an ID of skills, and we'll change this to a section. For the project section, we'll do the same. Projects, and change that to a section. About, change that to about and a section. And then the footer. And then this time we'll change the tag to footer. And then for the hero, we're not going to be having a link automatically scroll to that, but we'll just give this a class ID of hero and set that to header. So now what we need to do is select our first link. And then we're going to click the third icon here, which is page section. And we're going to choose the skills section. For our second link, which is completed projects, we'll choose our project section. Same thing with about. About goes to about. And then finally, the last one will go to the footer. And so when we hit live preview, they automatically scroll to each one. Now you'll notice that we have this blue text coming up as we enter each of the corresponding sections. So all we have to do to remove that or change it is make sure that it's showing up here. We'll select that link, and then here in the styles, we'll see the current tag. For current, we're just going to overwrite that to a white text color, which automatically updates the rest of these. So you'll see them change to white as we go into each one of those sections. So now we have these links set up. Let's go ahead and set up the rest of the links in this project. So we'll hit let's start a project here. For the settings cog, this is completely up to you what you want to set this at, but I'm, however, going to set this to email. I would now put in my email as well as the subject line I want it to have. So when people click this, they can send me an email. So that's how you would set that up. We'll go down to our link block, which is card large here. And for each one of these, you can set a URL. So if this were to go to a Dribble or Behance project, you can set that URL right here. And so you can set that for each one of these cards. Same thing goes with this secondary link here. You'd want to put in your Dribble profile or wherever you want it to take you. And for the last one down here at the bottom, again, you're going to want to set that to mail and fill out this info. And then for these 2 cards, you can set this to mail. And then for the subject, I would change this to consulting. And for the subject on this one, I would change this to design concept. So that's how you set up your links. And with that, we can hit the toggle preview, and we have our website desktop version now completed. So with the desktop version of this website now done, we're ready to move on to making this mobilely responsive. We're going to be doing that in episode 6, so I hope to see you guys there. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that future video. And as always, have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.